The day Walter Briggs was put out of his son's house, he found a home. He didn't know it yet, but it was already there, at the end of a rusted siding track. A single freight car, its 1887 stamp still faintly readable on the side planking, sitting on rails that hadn't seen a train in 8 years. That evening he swept out the dead leaves and the mouse nests and hung his bedroll on the iron hook above the door. He was 69 years old. He had nowhere else to go. And he was, for the first time in a long time, completely himself. If this story speaks to you, subscribe and turn the bell on. These are the ones that don't always get told. Walter Briggs had worked the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad for 35 years. He had laid track in 3 states, repaired trestles in ice and flood, and kept a written record of every working day in a series of small leather notebooks, 35 years of days, in a tin box he still kept beside his bed. He had married a woman named Agnes when he was 24, and loved her for 41 years, and when she died of pneumonia the previous February, he had tried to do the next reasonable thing, go and live with his son Thomas. Thomas had a good house in Hooper Valley, a steady job at the hardware supply, a wife named Nadine who kept everything in a state of perfect order and didn't care for disruptions. Walter tried not to be one. He kept to his room. He washed his own plate after every meal. He sat on the back porch when the weather allowed and carved small wooden figures from whatever scraps Thomas let him have, because his hands needed to be doing something or they got ahead of his thoughts. It hadn't been enough. You could try the county home, Thomas said. It was a Tuesday evening in the first week of November. Nadine was in the kitchen. Thomas spoke without looking up from his newspaper. You said this was a visit, Walter said. You said we'd figure something out. We have figured it out, Thomas said. The house isn't big enough, Pop. We've talked about this. You've talked, Walter said. I've listened. Thomas set the paper down and looked at his father with that particular combination of guilt and impatience that people have when they've already decided something and are tired of waiting for the other person to agree. There's nothing for you to do here, Thomas said. You're getting on. Walter stood up. He didn't speak for a moment. I've been getting on since before you were born, he said. And I've always found something to do. He packed his canvas sack that night, his clothes, his tin of notebooks, Agnes's photograph, and a railroad pension certificate that had arrived by post 3 weeks ago from the B&O main office in Baltimore. A document he hadn't had time to read carefully yet. He thanked Nadine for the meals, which surprised her. He shook Thomas's hand, which surprised Thomas more. At 7 the next morning, a 9-year-old boy named Danny Oakes was sitting on the front steps of his house down the block when Walter walked past with his canvas sack. Danny watched him all the way to the end of the street without saying a word. The rail siding was 3/4 of a mile south of town, down a gravel road that turned to frozen mud at the creek crossing. The freight car sat on a short length of track running to nowhere. The main line had been rerouted in 1899, and the siding abandoned with it. Walter had known about the car for years. Every B&O man in the valley knew about it. Nobody had done anything with it because nobody had needed to. He needed to now. The car was 40 feet long, built of oak planking weathered to gray. The sliding door on the south side was stiff but still worked. Inside, 3 inches of dead leaves, field mice, rusted iron hardware along the walls, and a cold so still it was like standing inside a block of stone. Walter stood in the doorway for a moment. Well, he said. He got to work. He spent the first 2 days clearing the car and thinking through what was possible. He was 69, not 90. He had his back and his hands and 35 years of knowing how to make something work in all weathers. On the second afternoon, under a pile of rotted canvas in the far corner, he found an oil lantern, a railroad signal lantern, the double-wick type the B&O used on line crews, sealed in its tin housing. The glass was cracked on one side. He had a piece of spare glass in his kit. He fitted it. He found a sealed can of oil tucked in the wall bracket, where signalmen had kept their equipment. He filled the reservoir. That evening, he lit the lantern. The light it threw was amber and steady, reaching all four walls of the freight car, making the old oak planking look almost warm. He set the lantern on the iron bracket above the door and looked at what the light revealed: the shape of a room. Not a bad room, for a man who knew what rooms were for. Over the following week, he built a small stove from scrap iron along the siding, a firebox with a pipe through a hole he cut carefully in the car's roof. First fire, the pipe smoked badly. Second fire, it drew right. Third fire, he sat beside it in the evening with a tin cup of hot water and felt, for the first time since Agnes died, something like quiet. He noticed a placard on the inside wall near the door, faded nearly white, declared surplus B&O District 4, 1899. He read it without thinking much of it. He didn't know yet what the words meant for him. He wouldn't know until the blizzard. He started carving the chess pieces from a length of close-grained walnut he'd bought from the Hooper lumber yard. One piece at a time, in the evenings, by the light of the lantern. What he didn't know was that the pension certificate in his canvas sack, the one from the B&O main office that he still hadn't read all the way through, contained a clause that was about to change everything, including what his son thought he owned. Danny Oakes found him on a Saturday morning, 3 days after Walter moved in. He came up the gravel road the way 9-year-olds go places alone when they've decided to do something and haven't told any adult about it. He stood outside the freight car looking at the amber light through the new glass and didn't knock, because there was nothing to knock on. "Hello," Walter said from inside. The sliding door opened an inch, one eye. "What are you doing in there?" Danny said. "Living," Walter said. "Come in if you're coming." Danny came in. He looked at the stove, the bedroll, the oil lantern on its bracket, the tin cup on the wooden shelf Walter had made from a plank. He looked at the chess piece Walter was carving. "Is that a horse?" he asked. "A knight," Walter said. "Not the same thing." Danny thought about this. "Can I watch? Can you be quiet while I work?" Yes, he was. For 20 minutes he sat on the wooden box near the stove and watched the carving without making a sound, which Walter thought was remarkable for a 9-year-old. When the piece was finished, roughed out, not polished, Danny said, "My pa has a chess set, but he doesn't teach me." "I'll teach you," Walter said. He didn't know why he said it. But he'd said it, and Danny had looked at him with those 9-year-old eyes that take things at face value. And that was that. Danny came back the next Saturday. And the next. By the third week he came every afternoon after school, cutting across the field behind the creek to avoid the road where someone might ask where he was going. The days took on their own shape. Walter rose before light, built the stove fire, had breakfast, whatever he had, which was not always much, and walked the length of the siding and back twice, because a man needed to move or his joints would give him trouble. Mornings went to the outdoor work, patching the car's exterior seams with pine pitch, weatherproofing the roof around the stovepipe, improving the door's seal against the wind. Afternoons, when Danny came, went to chess. He taught Danny the names of the pieces. Danny had them all by the end of the first lesson. He taught him how each piece moved. Danny had that by the end of the second. He taught him the idea of sacrifice, giving something valuable to gain something more important. Danny was quiet for a moment after that. "That's what my mother does," he said. "Yes," Walter said. Most good people do. One afternoon, Danny arrived carrying a cloth bundle his mother had sent. 4 biscuits and a small jar of salted butter. He set them on the plank shelf beside the tin cup with the formality of someone completing an important transaction. "She says you're to eat them while they're warm," Danny said. "Tell her I'm grateful," Walter said. "She also said she's still not sure you're not strange." "That's fair," Walter said. "Tell her that too." He ate 2 biscuits and saved the rest for morning. They tasted like someone's kitchen, which was its own kind of company. On a Thursday evening 2 weeks in, Ruth Oakes came herself. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at what Walter had built: the plank shelf, the fitted glass, the stovepipe, the lantern, the chess pieces lined up along the top of the tin box, and she didn't say anything for a moment. "Danny says you're teaching him chess," she said finally. "He's learning it himself," Walter said. "I'm just keeping him from teaching himself wrong." She looked at the 2 chairs. "He talks about you," she said. "More than he's talked about anyone since his father went to the mines." Walter didn't answer. He poured her a tin cup of hot water, all he had, and she sat down and held it with both hands, and they talked for an hour about nothing in particular, which was the best kind of conversation and the most useful. The oil lantern burned every evening, trimmed and filled, lit at dusk. Walter knew people could see it from the road, a small amber point in the dark, and that they wondered about it. He didn't mind. He noticed one Tuesday afternoon that someone had left a bundle of dry firewood stacked at the edge of the siding, no note attached. He burned it and said nothing. "Please, God," he thought some nights, "let Agnes know I'm all right." He thought she probably did. She had always been better at knowing things than he was. 3 weeks into December, with the sky pressing down on the valley in the way that meant serious weather was coming, Walter took Agnes's photograph from the tin box and sat with it in the lantern light for a long time. He didn't cry. He was past that stage and into the one that comes after, harder to name, but less sharp. He sat with her the way you sit with a fact you've accepted but haven't finished understanding. Then he put the photograph back in the tin box, next to the railroad pension certificate. He still hadn't read it all the way through. He kept meaning to. In Thomas's house in town, Nadine told the neighbor that Walter was living in a freight car on the south siding. The neighbor said he hoped the old man hadn't lost his mind. Thomas said nothing. He folded his paper and looked at the window. The blizzard hit the next Wednesday night. Walter had been watching the sky for 4 days and had done what he always did when serious weather came: stacked extra wood inside, sealed the wall gaps with fresh pitch, filled every vessel he had with water. He was ready in the ways he knew how to be ready. But what Walter didn't know, what he hadn't sat down to read yet, because he'd been too busy building the thing that was keeping him alive, was that the pension certificate in his canvas sack contained a clause that was about to change what the word his meant in a court of law. By midnight, the wind was the worst he'd heard since the 1899 blizzard that had knocked out the B&O Bridge at Fayetteville. He kept the stove going and turned the lantern up full and listened to the car creak and settle and hold. At 4 a.m, he heard something that wasn't the wind. He opened the sliding door. Danny was at the edge of the siding, knee-deep in snow, his coat wrapped around him the wrong way. He'd been coming in the middle of the blizzard, at 4 a.m, which made no sense at all, except that it was exactly the thing a 9-year-old would do if he decided there was someone who might need checking on. Walter went out without stopping to think. He went into the wind and the dark and the horizontal snow, moving by memory. He knew every foot of that siding. He found Danny by the sound he was making, a small sound against the larger sound of the storm, and he picked the boy up the way he'd carried Walter Jr. when Jr. was small, a very long time ago. That weight. That specific weight of a child who has stopped fighting the cold and started to give in to it. He got Danny inside and shut the door and put him close to the stove and kept his own hands on the boy's hands until he could feel the difference in them. The boy was cold, but not in danger. He was talking inside of 20 minutes. "I thought you might need help," Danny said. "I might," Walter said. "What kind of help did you bring?" Danny considered. "I didn't think that far." "That's all right," Walter said. He handed him the tin cup. Thinking far is overrated. They sat by the stove through the rest of the night. When Danny finally slept, Walter opened his canvas sack and took out the pension certificate, the letter from the B&O main office in Baltimore. He read it the way he should have read it when it first arrived, slowly, all the way to the end. Section 7. Railroad Retirement Benefits Act of 1899. Any employee completing 35 years of continuous service with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company shall be entitled, upon application, to permanent occupancy rights on any declared surplus property within the employee's last service district. Pending formal deed transfer, occupancy rights shall be established by continuous improvement of the property for a period of not less than 60 days. Walter counted back. He had been at the car for 54 days. 6 more days. He read the clause again, then a third time. He was a careful reader. 35 years of working from track charts and signal manuals had made him so. The clause said what it said. No ambiguity, no condition he had failed to meet. He had been here, continuously, improving the property, the stove, the floorboards, the window glass, the sealed walls, the door. Any district judge in the state would call that improvement. He folded the certificate and put it back in the tin box next to Agnes's photograph. He looked at Danny sleeping beside the stove, the boy's coat pulled up over his shoulders. He looked at the oil lantern still burning above the door, steady and amber and entirely his own. 6 days, he said quietly. The lantern said nothing. It just kept burning, the way it always did. When Danny woke at gray dawn, he read the certificate himself, slow and careful the way Walter had taught him to read important things. "So it's yours," Danny said. "In 6 days it's yours for real." "On paper," Walter said. "It's been mine the other way for 7 weeks." Danny thought about this. "So when my dad calls you the old man in the train car, he'll be right," Walter said. "And so will I." Thomas arrived 3 days after the blizzard broke. He came with Nadine and a man from the county welfare office named Mr. Finley, which suggested Thomas had thought this through and planned it, which was more foresight than Walter had expected from him. They came up the siding track on foot. The road was still iced. Danny was inside working through a chess problem. Walter was outside splitting timber he'd retrieved from the wood line, the axe steady in his hands. He set the axe blade in the block and waited. "Pop," Thomas said. "Thomas," Walter said. Nadine, Mr. Finley introduced himself. He had a clipboard. He looked at the freight car, at the stovepipe through the roof, the new glass in the wall, the lantern burning inside, with the expression of a man who had expected something worse. "This is railroad property," Thomas said. "You can't just." "It's mine," Walter said. He went inside and came back out with the pension certificate and held it out. Thomas took it and read it. His face went through several things. "You've been here, what, less than 2 months, 60 days on Saturday?" Walter said. Section 7 establishes permanent occupancy. I've already written to the district office in Charleston. The formal deed will come by post. Nadine looked at the freight car. at the lantern light through the wall glass, at the stovepipe. She was quiet. "Pop," Thomas's voice had changed. "Softer now, just come home. We can work something out." "The guest room, I have a room," Walter said. He said it the way you say a true thing, not hard, not loud, just the way it was. "I have a room," he said again. "I have a stove that works, a door that closes, and a lantern that burns. I built all of it. It's mine on paper in 5 days, and it's been mine in every way that matters since the second night I was here. I'm not telling you to feel bad about what you did. That's between you and God. But I'm not going back." Thomas looked at his father. Something moved in his face that Walter hadn't seen there in a long time. He wasn't certain what it was. It might have been respect. It might have been grief. It might have been both. "You're sure?" Thomas said. "I'm sure," Walter said. "Mister," Finley looked up from his clipboard. "The Section 7 clause is valid. I've seen it applied before, over in Raleigh County." He looked at Walter. "File the formal application at the B&O district office in Charleston once your 60 days are up." "I know where it is," Walter said. "I worked there for 11 years. Ruth Oakes had come up the siding road while they were talking. She had a covered pot and the quiet patience of someone who understands that some conversations need to finish on their own. She stood back and waited. Thomas looked at his father one last time. Then he nodded. Then he turned and walked back down the siding track. Nadine followed. "Mister." Finley closed his clipboard, nodded at Walter, and followed too. Walter watched them go until they were out of sight around the creek bend. Then he turned. Ruth came forward with the pot. "Bean soup," she said. "Still hot." "Thank you," Walter said. She looked at the car, at the glass in the wall, at the smoke coming steadily from the stovepipe, at Danny watching from the doorway, holding the wooden knight Walter had given him. "He built all of this?" she asked. "Every bit," Danny said. The deed arrived on the 17th of January. 2 pages, railroad company seal on the first, Walter Briggs printed on the second. Danny was there when the courier brought it up the siding road. He read both pages carefully. "Now it's official," he said. "Now it's official," Walter agreed. He put the deed in the tin box next to Agnes's photograph. Then he carved a small notch in the doorframe, the kind of mark that means this is the day it began. By February, he had laid a proper wooden floor from mill-end boards Ruth helped him source. By March, there was a real window on the east side, framed in oak, and the oil lantern hung from a hook he'd set in the car's original iron ceiling rigging. He'd made a table. He'd made 2 chairs. He'd finished the chess set. He and Danny played every afternoon. Ruth came on Sunday evenings with something in a pot and sat in the chair closest to the stove. Sometimes, when the game went long, she fell asleep in the chair with the last light on her face, and Walter and Danny would keep playing in silence so as not to wake her. Walter looked across the board at the boy and thought that God had put Danny Oakes on that front step on a November morning for reasons that were none of Walter's business to question. On an evening in late April, Danny asked, "Do you miss your old house?" Walter thought about it honestly. "I miss Agnes," he said. "I miss when Thomas was young and we understood each other better. But the house, no, this is my house. It's a train car. It's my train car." Danny moved his knight. He looked up. "I'm going to remember this place," he said. "Good," Walter said. "I'm going to keep it worth remembering. Home is not given to you. It is made from what you find, from what you know, from what you are when everything has been taken away except yourself." Walter Briggs found his home at 69 years old, in a railroad freight car on a rusted siding. and he made it the only way he knew how, one day at a time, with his hands, and with whatever the world had left him to work with. That was enough. It had always been enough. The hard part was getting to the place where you believed it. Have you ever watched someone build something real out of nothing and understood, watching them, what the word dignity actually means? If this story stayed with you, leave us a comment below. Subscribe and turn the bell on so you don't miss what comes next. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded it is never too late, and a home is not an address. It is an act of will. Until the next story. Through all of it, the eviction, the blizzard, the silence of being forgotten, the lantern burned.